Michael Solomon will be introducing our high-level experts today, and I will step in a little bit later to facilitate the questions. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Michael. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Just by way of introduction, the National Mine Closure Strategy was gazetted about a month ago and is due for closing of comment on the 26th of July. The strategy was put together by the Mine Closure Team at the DMRE, and we are fortunate enough to have Reuben, the director of Mine Closure for the DMRE, and who headed up the team to develop the strategy along with a team from the DMRE and also the Geosciences Council. So we're going to be looking very briefly at the strategy today. It is premised on the concept of mineral economic succession planning, and this webinar is part 2 of the series on mineral economic succession planning. We brought the National Mine Closure Strategy discussion forward because of the time limit in comments on that. And so we hope today to be able to clarify any issues around the National Mine Closure Strategy. So we have, just looking at the strategy itself, the strategy is premised on economic succession planning, as I've indicated. The current policy legislation regulation caters primarily for rehabilitation of physical environment, but is largely silent on economic sustainability of mining affected communities and mine closure. And so the strategy itself it is supplementary and complementary to existing legislation. There's no erosion or change of direction in existing legislation, but instead of just looking at physical environment, we're now looking at and rehabilitation. We're looking at the question of social impact on mine closure. And from that perspective, the strategy is very progressive and very creative. And so what we hope to do is to actually open up the session today. So I'm going to introduce the panel that we have today. We've got a large panel. Today, we're very fortunate to have Reuben, the director for mine closure for the DMRE today, who's in the hot seat. We have with us Mariette Liefferink from the Federation for Sustainable Environment, and Mariette is known to most of the mining industry as one of our most prominent mining environmental activists, and so we're looking forward to her comment. We have Setshedi Rasepae of the Liefferink Land Committee, and Setshedi is part of the Liefferink community that have been in long-standing conflict with mining companies over the question of mining in communities and the benefits that communities accrue from mining. So he's a very important participant in today. We've got Prof. Dickinson, who's the partner and head of mining practice for Weber Wenzel, a large corporate legal firm. Stephina Mudau from the Minerals Council, representing the industry version, the industry in this process, and then Carla Hudson from the Impact Catalyst and the Mine Water Coordinating Body. And the way that we're going to manage this today is that I'm going to give a few minutes of overview. I'll keep it as short as possible. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give 5 minutes of their views on the National Mine Closure Strategy, and then we're going to open up the floor to questions from the participants. Just looking at the National Mine Closure Strategy, we're looking at the planning of closure throughout the mining life cycle. Importantly, one of the paradigm shifts is looking at regional solutions for mine closure rather than just the individual mine closure. And that is, there's a coherent reason for that, is that mines usually occur in clusters and they usually draw on common labor-sending communities and mining-dependent communities. So collaborative regional development is a main feature of the strategy. We're looking at economic succession planning and the development of a post-mining economy. Economic benchmarking is an important aspect of it. We're looking at planning for a diversified post-mining economy, the integration of socioeconomic activities with mining environment and closure, peer review, monitoring, and evaluation are all aspects that you will see in the document that we sent to you with the mailer for this presentation today. And most importantly, what we want to look at as well is not to increase the rents of the mining industry. So we're increasing not an increase in the responsibility of mining companies, but we don't want to actually increase the rents imposed in the mining industry. What we want to do is to look at money that's already been spent on social programs and environmental programs in the mining industry and make that cost money more efficient in the way that it is spent and the way that the impacts are actually deployed and measured. Economic succession planning we dealt with in the first series is really just looking at concurrent and economic diversification on mine sites and around mine sites, really focused on the dependent communities and the impacted communities around mines, but with a specific view to looking at post-mining, a sustainable post-mining substituted economy for mining dependent communities. From a policy perspective, I think that there are different dimensions to it. A mine is not a mine is not a mine. We've got to look at the whole question of abandoned and ownerless mines. We've got to look at mines that are closed but under responsible management, mothballed mines. We've got to look at operating mines, and most importantly, new mines in planning. The dimensions of policy are that one starts with strategies, then goes into policy, statutes, and regulation. And these elements have got to deal with remediation in the context of this strategy with post-mining economic planning, with financial provisioning, which is already in place. Risk management and safety and health factors are already important in a post-mining environment. And primarily when it comes to the implementation, there's not only the enforcement of it, there's a whole question of accountability. Who is accountable? Who is going to be managing the program, the programs, who is responsible, where the funding is going to come from, and how we measure progress. So all of this is encapsulated in the thinking behind the strategy. We look for sustainable post-mining support for mining dependent communities. We want alignment with existing SLP, CSI, and the MPR financial provision expenditure with a common economic development framework to optimize social plan spend, and as I said, to avoid additional rents. We want to ensure that regional collaborative development between geographically clustered mines takes place, that people don't duplicate. And again, that's part of this efficiency drive to make the existing money go further and not laden either government or the mining companies with additional expenditure. And most importantly, we want to encourage just transition for mining communities as mines transition towards diversified energy sources and extending their economic reach. When talking about the alignment of SLP, CSI, and EMPR funding, at the moment, these fundings are these programs in any mining company are largely disparate, and mining companies themselves don't necessarily communicate or collaborate with one another in these programs. So what we're looking is that part of the post-mining economic succession plan that we're looking towards will provide a framework wherein one can then inform the rehabilitation of properties so that we decide on a more detailed end-use plan for mining land than is currently required by NEMA and by the MPRDA. That if we can agree on more detailed and more comprehensive land use, one can then gear the environmental management plans or rehabilitation plans to meet those requirements, and then behind that bring in a social and labor plan and corporate social investment spending so that it actually serves the same framework, the same purpose. There is always that issue that's how do we're currently bound by SLP to meet the requirements of the municipal integrated development plans, and we will talk to that later in this presentation. So we want to look at an aggregated economic impact, not only within the programs within a mine itself, but between mines, and then to look at regional programs that meet that. And that is really looking at alignment to decrease duplication within mining companies and between mining companies, to have a common economic development framework that informs rehabilitation and mine closure, and social impact mitigation strategies around mine closure, and then to actually embed these programs in the IDP of the host municipality. So in fact, the mining companies end up paying for their own economic development strategies, or the post-mining economic strategies, and not just for arbitrary shopping list expenditure that you're currently seeing within the IDPs, which range from tar roads to admin blocks to clinics to toilets at schools. That we're looking to try and actually structure the spending a lot more coherently. And as I said, that's we're looking at correlating programs, aggregating budgets, and actually moving towards a structured closure rather than the where we are right now. So in conclusion, sustainable post-mining economies for mining-dependent communities, a regional approach, the promotion of broad-ranging ecosystem services, land, landscape, vegetation, energy, water, to mitigate both climate change processes while supporting mining communities. We want to promote, in the quest of carbon neutrality, diversified energy mix, but make sure that mining-dependent communities actually participate in these imperatives. And then we want to leverage current mining activity to catalyze other forms of non-mining activity that are largely independent of the mining value chain and therefore sustainable after mine closure. Regional collaboration is important. As we've indicated, mines usually occur in clusters for good geological reasons, and we seek to encourage mines to work together in developing these economic frameworks. So that is a plot of 600 odd mines that are operating in the country today, and the strategy actually looks towards defining closure regions where there are common aspects of mine closure from common communities, common technical aspects, common commodities, and common sort of political and environmental locations, so that they can plan these processes collectively. A very good example is the area north of Pilanesberg, where you've got 4 platinum mines in close proximity to one another. There's also a large cement mine and factory nearby. They're all drawing on the same communities, the Bakhatla communities and the Bapalani communities, and there's no reason why these mines should not be collaborating in a regional development framework that will inform their mine closure strategies. And with that, I'd like to hand over to comment from our panelists, and I'd like Mr. Reuben Masenya, the Director for Mine Closure for the DMRE, to kick off by just telling us what he thinks is different about this particular mine closure strategy in comparison with previous strategies that have been gazetted. And
Michael, thank you very much for the opportunity, as well as also all the SAIMM members. Yeah, I think colleagues can be aware that the department have published a number of strategies, but this particular one is different to the others. Reason being that, you know, when you can, I think, recall, previously we have done what we call the regional mine closure strategy. Now, why are we saying that this particular one, you know, has more advantage than the regional closure strategy? Regional closure strategy, when it was put together, was with regards to a response to the Watersrand issues, particularly the water, the AMD issues. Now, the main focus has always been that, you know, it was not encompassing the entire national issues, whereas this particular strategy talks to the national-wide issues, and it extends over beyond the water. It talks about all other elements as colleagues can be aware, that there are a number of environmental challenges that gave rise to this country post since the mining started since 1800. Now, this is a unique strategy. It focuses on all of them. And again, it's focusing on the real issues that would give rise to positives in our country. That's the first thing I would like to highlight. And the other thing is that colleagues are aware that we have social issues. Now, yes, there are social approaches where we or mining companies tried to address the issues. But one would say that the SLP that we're all aware of has limited factors because of, when you deal with issues in silos, you end up not addressing the entire issues. For instance, if you deal with a social labor plan only talks to specific issues, excluding others. But this uniqueness about this strategy is that it takes that social issue and come with an approach of now including it in a solution that includes also another solution of an environment, because of now we are saying, let's not deal with issues in silos, but let's rather combine and have a solution that is sustainable. Remember, we want a sustainable approach, so sustainability for our communities. I seem to have lost you, Michael. I think your mic is mute.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Reuben. Thanks very much indeed for that contribution, Reuben. I'm going to go to the other end of the spectrum now, and I'm going to ask Mariette Liefferink, who's, as I said, one of our most prominent activists, and she's got a lot to say on the strategy. I sit on Mariette's board, and it's quite interesting that Mariette doesn't necessarily agree with all the things that I've got to say about it. So Mariette, would you like to give us your opinions on the strategy and how you see it in relation to previous strategies that have been tabled and where we can take this? Mariette.
Thank you very much, Michael. And my comments will be really with diffidence, with modesty. I was asked to speak on the enforceability of the strategy. And if I may perhaps just refer back to the historic and current track record of the DMRE and the Department of Water and Sanitation, because the historic and current track record adduces overwhelming evidence of weak enforcement and implementation of the MPRD regulations for closure. To exemplify, Gauteng has been granted 15 closure certificates between 2011 and 2016, with 0 certificates to mining right holders. So we do feel that there ought to be perhaps teeth in the national closure strategy and policy, which will emanate from the strategy. There ought to be stronger focus on the polluter pays principle, including the retrospectivity of the polluter pays principle and the apportionment of liability. And then also stronger focus on addressing the current loopholes that exist in our legislation. Just to exemplify in this regard, the common practice is to, instead of applying for closure, to apply for liquidation at the end of mine. And there is a lack of articulation between the closure requirements in the MPRDA and the process of winding up companies in terms of Chapter 14 of the Companies Act of 1973. It is also unclear whether the liquidator is obliged to apply for a closure certificate. And another common practice is for mining companies to avoid their closure commitments by selling mines close to closure onto less resource companies. It's referred to as pass the parcel, or to exist their liabilities by changing the controlling interest of the corporate entity holding the right. So we would like to see that some of these loopholes be addressed in perhaps the final closure strategy and the policy that will emanate from the strategy. The next section I was asked to talk on is on social equity and impact. I understand that that would demand, social equity will demand that communities be treated with fairness and justice. And if I may perhaps just refer in this regard to a statement that was made by Anglo American, where it stated that it is unacceptable for mining companies when they move on leaving gaping holes in the ground, polluted rivers, and unenriched and disrupted communities. So to prevent the unsustainable livelihood opportunities in the post-closure scenario, we feel that perhaps the mine closure strategy should put stronger focus on preparing communities for closure, and that should really start at commencement of mining. I think the primary goal of closure preparation is to avoid negative legacies, as all legacies, whether social, biophysical, or economic, finally impacts upon communities. Preparation must also be community focused, not politically focused and driven. And successful preparation is dependent on early, effective, and ongoing consultation with communities. This will help to ensure that communities are better off on closure than when mining started. Already in our MPRD regulations, it does refer to predetermined and agreed upon future land uses. So we strongly advocate that since they are the ultimate recipients of potential ongoing and historical pollution and the potential future land users, communities must be involved in the agreements regarding future land use of the affected areas, as well as in decisions regarding the establishment of objectives for such future land use, and discussing alternatives for engineering interventions where decisions regarding such options will affect future land use. Of course, these communities will ultimately take ownership of post-closure initiatives, and that is why it is so necessary to prepare communities. And I think also with information dissemination, so that communities also understand the benefits of not just short-term benefits, but medium and long-term benefits and intra and intergenerational benefits or impacts. Then my last item that I was asked to talk about is the compatibility of this strategy with our current regulation. I think it's compatible in the sense that it speaks about concurrent or progressive rehabilitation, which is also in terms of our 2015 financial regulations. But here I just wish to interpose that we do see rehabilitation as rehabilitation to a sustainable future land use and livelihood opportunities. Wilderness status or open space are not sustainable land uses, and also that the best practicable environmental option must be followed and not best available technology not exceeding excessive cost. Then we also would again emphasize that the closure process must start at commencement of mining, even though it is included in our MPRD regulations, it is not implemented successfully. And then I also just want to refer in the closure strategies, there is a reference made to uraniferous waste. And there I want to mention that falls within the category of latent and residual impacts. And of course, with uranium and its decay products, it remains radioactive for geological ages, not just biological ages. So I would encourage also to look perhaps at the latent impacts of, especially within the gold fields where our gold ore co-occurs with uranium. So those are my comments. I hope I have not exceeded the time allotted to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariette. We really appreciate your comprehensive response as always. I'm going to what Mariette had to say about the legal aspect of it is a good segue into Bruce Dickinson, who's the mining partner for Weber Wenzel. Bruce, as a mining partner in large corporate law firm, and with the extensive experience that you've had in mining legislation generally, but specifically mine closure and other issues, how do you see how do you see this? And I also want to refer to your experience in looking at the whole question of community benefit through the trusts that you put together. How do you see this from a legal perspective, and how do you think that your clients are going to accept and buy into the strategy?
Mike, thank you, and afternoon, everyone. I'll try and keep it short and sharp. I think in terms of support from mining companies, I think that there's probably sort of two key drivers behind this. The one is what I'd refer to as the ring of fire concept, and the other is, I think an obvious one to us all, which is the ESG imperatives. I mean, turning to the sort of the ring of fire, and I think it's really apt in terms of what's going on in our country currently. If we look at what surrounds our cities, towns, and our mines, is effectively the have-nots. I mean, we have 70% youth unemployment in our country, and it's really imperative that we do everything that we can to uplift these communities that surround our cities, towns, and our mines. And looking at an economic succession model, that starts from mine planning through to mine closure to enable sustainable communities is really, really critical. Now, I think at the end of the day, sort of, and we can see the implications of not having such a plan in place, what those implications are for mining companies. I mean, we just need to look at the situation around Rasepae minerals, what's happening with the chrome mines up in Limpopo and recently in some Northern Cape, to see how if we don't have proper economic succession plan in place, proper economic plans in place, how they can sort of blow back on mining companies and the ability to operate effectively. I think the issue here has been that mining companies have spent billions over the years on uplifting communities around them, trying to address environmental issues, but also trying to address social issues. Unfortunately, what's happened is that mining companies have had to step into the void of failure by government to sort of deliver on basic services. So a lot of the money that mining companies have had available to spend on CSI, SLP, and other initiatives have been directed towards providing basic services such as healthcare, education, and basic services such as water. So very little, I think, has been left available towards being able to sort of develop socio-economic opportunities around the mine. So I think this is a great initiative that mining companies will buy into. I think if one starts looking at areas regionally, and you have on board all the relevant stakeholders, including government, parastatals, development agencies, and the mining companies themselves, looking at a region, looking at how it may be developed holistically, and each role player then playing their part in the development of those regions. I think this will go a long way towards addressing a lot of the issues that we have in our country. So I think as an initiative, I think there will be great buy-in from the mining companies. Particularly, Mike, I think as you were saying in the beginning, one's looking to aggregate impacts, one's looking to avoid duplication of initiatives. And so I think moving to a sort of a regional model, looking at areas regionally and saying, okay, well, you mining company A look after this bit, you mining company B will look after this bit. We'll start seeing a lot better bang for buck and a lot more impactful investment into communities that really need that investment. I think the other key driver, as I mentioned, for mining companies getting behind this initiative is obviously the ESG side of life. Mining companies in particular come under very direct ESG pressures from shareholders, investors, financiers, and NGOs. And it's imperative for mining companies to develop a robust and auditable ESG framework. So I think the proposed strategy is a key initiative that can be adopted by mining companies in addressing these ESG imperatives. And in fact, I think there's much to be gained by mining companies in embracing the strategy in order to meet the ESG targets. And I think when structures these correctly, it's not, and I think Mark, you mentioned this, it need not necessarily be a one-way street or just cash out. If one looks at what initiatives could be developed in these mining regions and complementary sort of services, and so on, there's great opportunities for mining companies to invest in those and to actually gain a return. I think turning to the communities question, I think this has been a vexed question and remains a vexed question. For 20 odd years, we've been looking at how best to sort of try and structure these community investments. I think 20 years ago we were looking at doing deals with named communities and hoping that through the traditional structures that there would be trickle down benefits through to communities, through to sort of a decade ago, moving towards the realization that communities around mines are not necessarily homogenous. That you have a large inflow of people seeking opportunities around mines who don't necessarily belong to sort of traditional communities, and how do you give them a voice? How do you see that benefits trickle down to them as well? So moving towards more broad-based representative sort of community structures. So I think a lot of work's being done in that respect to sort of try and work with these sort of broader regional sort of community structures. And again, looking at regional development, the question comes to mind to say, well, does one then deal with communities on a regional basis for the benefit of all that live within that sort of broader region, and therefore we look at community structures. I think the other issue that we've been looking at over the sort of last decade or so is how do you enable communities to invest in these kind of socio-economic programs. I think a lot of communities structures have been constrained because they've been set up as PBOs, and therefore can only invest in public benefit activities themselves, which don't necessarily lead to activities which are going to sustain them post-mine closure. So I think the last number of years we've been looking at ways in which we can sort of restructure those programs to say, okay, well, can we structure them in such a way as to enable those communities to utilize the sort of cash flows from mine dividends and so on to invest in other activities, to invest in other businesses and so on, to enable them to be sustainable post-mine closure. I think if you look at the sort of the Bafokeng strategy that we worked on 20 years ago, the idea was to corporatize their mineral assets, utilize the cash generated from those investments to invest in non-mining businesses, which would then see the Bafokeng be able to survive beyond mine closure. I think there's a very classic example of where that's worked successfully. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks very much, Bruce. This was very, very useful. I think it's a good introduction to ask Setshedi Rasepae from the Liefferink Land Committee, who is a community that has been actively involved in both conflict and resolving the conflict with the mining company. And Setshedi, how do you see this? Do you think that mineral economic succession planning is a positive move for communities? Do you think that this strategy, which hopefully will lead to policy and to legislation, do you think we're moving in the right direction? How do you see it from a community perspective?
Thank you very much, Prof, and the fellow panelists. Prof, indeed, we welcome the initiative on the regional mine closure strategy. I think it will help us as the communities. The initiatives will also start to help communities to engage actively on environmental and socioeconomic issues. I also want to emphasize that this is important for us as the communities to think of initiatives beyond mining and to build resilient communities in particular. And it's also important on the aspects of consolidation of the current interventions, being it the CSI, SLP and the EMPs. We need to look at that. Whether does it really help us as the community? Is it fit for the purpose? The other thing that I want to emphasize is the community participation, not consultation. We want the meaningful participation in the processes as it is clearly defined on the Mining Charter 3, what is meant by community participation. All in all, we are saying no decision about us as communities without us, because at the end of the day, we are the ones who remain in the communities, who bears the brunt of what could be the environmental injustices and so forth. I also want to emphasize this offers an opportunity for us as the communities to start to work with the NPOs and the NGOs in the space of the environment. I think it's very critical as the communities to be empowered. I also urge the government to start looking at educating the communities about the rights, their rights on environmental aspects. I also want to align myself with Mariette on the very important thing that polluters must pay. It's very important that whatever wrong or whatever non-compliance, end of the day, whoever is responsible takes the responsibility so that we have a just system. What is short of in the strategy is the how part. Like I've said to the communities, it should be clear how are we going to participate. I would strongly suggest that there be a sort of a forum that will empower communities to be able to say no to whatever initiative or any ways to close the mine, without really making sure that all the requirements, the legislative requirements and their obligations are honored. I also was to echo the sentiment that it has not been, a clear or a visible enforcement from the government side of things. As a result, I would really want to, in a way, limit the powers that the government would have, because it's only between the government and the mines. There is nowhere where the NPOs or the NGOs feature in the communities. And I'm saying this so that we can have a say on the guarantees that are issued by the mines. Because some of the mines will liquidate, some of the mines will decide to close tomorrow, as opposed to the essence of the act, that 5 years before closure, there has to be talks about closure. I want us to have a forum that is equal, where we as the communities participate, the NPOs participate in the form of a trust, and we decide what is good for us, how the guarantees are dispersed in an event that the mine is not able to rehabilitate. And also emphasize that rehabilitation mine closure plans starts right at the beginning of the mine. We shouldn't wait 5 years before the mine closes or for plans to close the mine. Should start right at the beginning with our involvement, so that our aspirations, because at the end of the day, we may have to go back to the very same land that has been polluted by the mines. So our participation is quite critical as the affected communities. I'll pause there, Prof.
Thanks very much indeed, Setshedi. I appreciate that. And I'm going to go on to Carla Hunter next and leave Stephina from an industry perspective to last. Carla, you wear two hats. You wear both the mine water coordinating body hats and I think that the water issues from a mine closure perspective, both from a negative perspective in terms of acid mine drainage and other forms of mining impacted water, are a function, but on the community or the social impact mitigation strategy aspect, is that water is totally central to what can be done with mining land after mine use in terms of alternative economies. How do you see the strategy in both of those contexts? And particularly from a regional, from impact catalyst, for those who don't know, is an imperative whereby mining companies and government are collaborating at a regional level and are really spearheading this whole concept of regional collaboration, not only between mining companies, but intersectorally and also with government. So, Carla, how do you see it?
Thank you very much, Mike, for the opportunity, and thank you to all the other panelists and very valuable information that they were sharing. So the Mine Water Coordination Body has actually been in this space since 2015, looking at regional collaborative projects with mine water as the center, as actually the catalyst. So basically we, so I'm focusing on the Upper Olifants in Mpumalanga specifically. If you can remember Mike's map, that is where the biggest concentration of dots actually were. So we're working, because since 2015, obviously with climate change, there has been a very clear concept that coal mining is going to end sooner than other resources. So that was why it was actually started in that. And the MWCB is actually a really good example of working together collaboratively with national, provincial, and we're actually now starting with the municipalities, because we've realized that none of these projects that we actually are collaborating with different mining companies and different industries can actually really be implemented without the municipalities. So together with the Impact Catalyst, we are in the process of capacitating municipalities to actually understand how mine closure and how this environmental legacy actually impacts on the municipality and its residents. So that was quite a big breakthrough. So actually in Mpumalanga now, through the Impact Catalyst, we are working on the Mpumalanga Growth and Development Plan, and we are very much involved in the 3 districts DDMs, so district development plans. So in that aspect, we would like to align, because there's never been alignment between the municipalities plan and the SLP and the CSI and the EMPs. And I think that now that we can actually talk to each other and actually realize we need to find the alignment, that the SLP doesn't become a road building exercise, but actually supporting the plan that the municipality have, and that people are not just grabbing projects to tick boxes, but there is actually a collaborative regional plan where everybody can actually buy into, not just the mines, but everybody that is actually active in that region. So we see it as very, very important. We've actually got pilot projects where we are testing 20 years worth of research on the irrigation of mine water, on food crops, and then of course on fiber crops and biomass crops, which actually are becoming quite important now. So we're very, very excited about this new road that we're going to take. We have the Mine Water Coordinating Body was very lucky to be part of this from the beginning, and Mr. Masenya was actually is part of our steering committee. So we're very excited, and we support this. And obviously there's always hiccups, but the fact that we can actually talk about it, I think will smooth the way forward to make sure that we have sustainable socioeconomic upliftment projects for communities during and after mine closure. I don't know if that covers everything, Mike.
Thanks very much, Carla. That was very, very useful. And I've left Stephina Mudau to last, because Stephina, at the end of the day, it's your constituency, your members from the Minerals Council perspective that are going to have to be implementing these programs. I know as well that earlier on this week or last week, you had a large meeting with Mr. Masenya, with your members on the mine closure plan. And I'm really interested to know what came out of that meeting and what the response of the Minerals Council is to the strategy, and how your members see it. Stephina.
Thank you very much, Professor Solomon and Aisha, the panelists, and the rest of the participants. From the Minerals Council side, I must say we're very excited about this, the development around the mine closure strategy. And it's something that we have over a very long period of time advocated for. In terms of in principle, we support the development and the implementation of this. I have a disturbance here. Can I just?
While we're waiting for Stephina to return to us, are there any questions that we can ask? We're not going to have much time for questions. Stephina's back, right?
Yes, sincere apologies for that disturbance. I was just starting off to say, from the Minerals Council side, we are very excited about these developments, and it's something that we have been longing for over a long period of time. And from the mining industry side, we have long realized that in some of the instances, individual mine closure planning is not sufficient. One needs to collaborate and make more effort around working together with various stakeholders in order to achieve sustainable closure going forward. So as a matter of principle, the Minerals Council welcomes and supports the development and also the ultimate implementation of the strategy. We are of the view that the strategy provides a very strong basis, to strengthen the regional collaboration between the mines and various stakeholders in ensuring that there is environmental sustainability as well as economic succession during and also post mine closure. We strongly believe that the strategy provides the way we used to do things around aim to only focusing on rehabilitation and only mainly achieving the environmental objectives. Whilst we are very happy about the couple of enablers and the dependencies that we strongly feel that those should be put in place in order for us to realize the success of the implementation of the strategy. And some of the enablers were highlighted by the previous panelists. Issues around the enabling legislative framework as a catalyst for the implementation of the concepts that are provided for in the strategy. I think we are all aware of the fact that the current legislative framework mainly caters for individual mine closure planning, and as I've highlighted earlier on, strongly looking at the environment or the biophysical aspect of things. And now with the move to also integrating the socio-economic aspects of closure and ensuring that there is economic succession planning, that particular move needs to be translated into the prevailing legislation. Another important enabler or the dependency that we strongly feel that should be looked at now in the development phase of the strategy and not wait until the actual implementation is the proposal around integrating the EMPRs with social and labor plans and also the CSI projects. The three elements are primarily regulated by various pieces of legislation, and the integration of the three would, to my mind, necessitate the amendments of those pieces of legislation. And as Mariette said, the strategy needs to have some teeth in order for it to be a success. So we should begin to see some roadmap in the strategy around the amendments of various pieces of legislation in order to enable what is being proposed in as far as the integration of the EMPs, SLPs, and the CSI projects. Another critical dependency or enabler to ensure the success of what is envisaged in the strategy is the proposal around an appropriate institutional arrangement to oversee and also manage the implementation of economic succession projects in a defined mine closure region. We strongly feel that the strategy should begin to sort of make pronouncements around an ideal institution to oversee and manage this regional closure initiative more from a regulatory perspective. And I think one can look at various proposals in this regard, be it to want to augment the capacity and the resources of the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, or customization of existing agencies, or a proposal around a institutionalization or development of a new agency altogether to oversee the implementation of the strategy. And I think one other critical issue is from the mining industry side, a strategy of this nature will be incomplete if it doesn't begin to look at the mechanisms or ways to sort of fast track or make roadways around the issue of issuance of closure certificate. As Mariette had indicated earlier on, the industry has battled in so many ways in terms of attaining closure. And for me, I see this as one of the incentives for facilitation of companies getting their closure certificate timeously. And from the mining industry side, we are hoping to see some leverage out of the strategy that would sort of begin to address some of the bottlenecks that have been encountered by mining companies in as far as following the process of obtaining the closure certificates. The issue of participation by various role players or various stakeholders was highlighted quite strongly by the community representative. And we, from the mining industry side, we also want to align with that to say it's very important that all the relevant role players are brought into the process now at the pencil stage of the strategy, because we can all agree that the strategy really goes beyond hard pure mining issues. It touches on various economic activities and also responsibilities by various sectors, be it agriculture, energy, or whatever that has been agreed in a particular region. So the buy-in and the involvement of those role players and stakeholders are quite critical now at the pencil stage of the strategy. Another critical issue from the mining industry side of things, and I was happy to hear from Professor Solomon that the requirements of the closure strategy will not require additional rents from the mines. It will be a matter of looking at what is currently being provided for in as far as the implementation of closure plans, environmental management programs, CSI projects, as well as the SLP, and see how those funds can be used sufficiently. And again, the strategy should also be very clear in terms of the funding requirements for implementation of the projects that will be defined for a particular region. I know you've clarified, Professor Solomon, but it's not very clear in the strategy as to whether there will be additional funding required in order to fund projects in the particular region. And what you've indicated earlier on to say we will be looking at the already existing funding, it's very important that that comes out strongly in the strategy. And other than that, in terms of our engagements that we had, with the DMRE last week. I must say that we had quite a successful engagement. And from our side, that engagement was very helpful in terms of us understanding the rationale and the thinking of the department on some of the proposals that have they have put forward. We also had the opportunity to share with the department some of our concerns and the issues that I've just shared with you, those dependencies that we strongly feel that should be dealt with now at the development stage. And most importantly, from the mining industry side, we are ready to hit the ground running, and we wanted to understand the time frames from the department side in terms of finalizing the strategy and putting in place all the necessary ingredients that are required to get to the implementation of the strategy. And that was the start of many engagements that we are looking forward to have with the department and also other interested and affected party in the implementation of the strategy.
Thanks,
and
Stephina.
in concluding, yes, just to indicate that we, as the mining industry, we're looking forward to working together with government and all other stakeholders to perfect this concept, and so that we are, at the end of the day, we have a strategy that is implementable, a strategy wherein there is buy-in by all relevant stakeholders. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stephina. That is very, very valuable, and we really appreciate your input and your time. We're kind of running out of time in terms of questions. Harrow, you've been very active on the chat group. I just want to point out before Harrow starts, we have to have a hard stop at 1 o'clock because the SAIMM have got another session that's going to be starting. Aisha, we're very happy to take questions from people in the community, either through you or to me directly. Alternatively, we can set up a second session where we just have a Q&A session on the strategy as part of the series, if you'd like to do that. But Harrow, you've had quite a lot to say in the chat group. Would you like to put in your ticky bits worth?
I can also go ahead and read what he said, if you would like. Just starting off, maybe it'll be quicker. We have now mentioned that the SLPs do not align with other planning documents, especially those of municipalities. Will the new closure regulations enforce such integration, or will we just see this fault and not be able to fix it necessarily? And this kind of follows on with his next point, which is the alignment with EMPs, and that he can vouch for that because a master student of his reviewed 3 EIAs for coal mine developments dating from 2017 to 2019, and they were pretty silent on post-mining activity. So just a comment on rehabilitation was provided. This is not development. Can any of the panelists comment on how the new regulations will force changes in the EMPs and the EIAs in practice? So if we could get hands up from the panelists to address these questions quite quickly, and then we will have to close the session in about 5-10 minutes. I'm sorry about the quick rush, but yes, I do think that we can go forward, and I'll plan a Q&A session and touch base with you, Michael, and the panelists, if we can do that. Okay, Reuben, I see your hand is up. You can go ahead and address some of the questions.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for fruitful discussions. And yeah, with regards to the departmental plan, definitely we want to make sure that when we implement a strategy, the municipalities on board. Hence, I think part of what you've started doing is to engage the municipalities themselves, so that our plans has to be aligned with their plans. Because if we don't want to have a strategy that at the end of the day, municipality won't get a buy-in. But from our initial engagement, remember, with regards to post-mining economy, it's not only the municipality, the provincial economic development is involved as well. So we are engaging those departments to make sure that implementation is going to be easy. currently, like what I can say, remember we are still at the phase whereby we are finalizing the document. Our plan, I think, as per what the Prof has said, our plan is to make it a policy, and the policy will have a teeth. Remember, previously we couldn't use our teeth because of MPRDA was silent with regards to how those who don't follow the law are supposed to be dealt with. But currently with the NEMA, I think it's clear with regards to whoever contravene the regulations as well as the law, what is it that must be done? So the department will be moving towards that, because of now we believe that we have teeth, and flowing from those teeth is this strategy, because of it forms part of one environmental system. I think in a nutshell, I've tried to be quick. Maybe I've done justice, but I would certainly request that should it happen that I've never done justice, I've done a little bit of justice. Maybe let's have those comments noted, so that from the department perspective, we can provide a clear response. But thank you very much for all of you. And I see that we all talk one language. No more ghost towns, no more ghost towns.
Okay, thanks. There's one more question, Aisha, if you'd like to address that quickly.
Okay, great. I will address the question, and then we can have Grain Rapson, who we can hand over to him for a quick comment. So from Maria, thank you everyone for the great presentations. How will the approval work with DEF, the Department of Water and Sanitation, and the DMRE, as well as the integration of provincial and national agencies for diversified economies, agriculture, tourism, social, etc.? Will a specific department lead the approval in terms of relinquishment criteria and then the success of these? Mines are reluctant to proceed unless they have agreed relinquishment criteria, i.e. a guarantee that they will obtain their closure certificate if they implement the closure projects, including substituted businesses that they have committed to. So I think is Reuben, is that an old hand, or do you want to address the comment?
Yeah, I think just a quick response to that. The leading department with regards to mining is the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, and hence with regards to implementation of one environmental system. Remember, the idea of one environmental system is that everything will be processed via the DMRE, and then the DMRE will do the necessary consultation with other departments. Remember, with regards to how applications are done, you apply the DMRE, including the closure, then that one opens up for other government departments, of which one environmental system was seeking to say everything DMR, then DMRE will make sure that we'll see the process to the end up until the closure certificate is granted, or up until the license has been granted.
Thanks, Reuben. There's an additional question from Jenny, and I think that you said Garen Rabson had a question, Aisha.
Yes. I suppose that also speaks to what Reuben said with Harry's comment. Maybe it is also time to move on from one environmental system to one development system. So I suppose you can speak to that. And then Mr. Rapson, if you would like to speak to us directly, and then I will also just read out Jennifer's comment, and then we'll have to close the session. Sorry about this.
Thank you, and thanks to all the panelists. I'm actually going to take advantage of Reuben being on the hot seat here. Reuben, just two questions from my side. How much have you engaged with the Department of Environmental Affairs in producing this strategy document? Because I think with the imminent publication of the final set of financial provisioning regs, I think it's a key opportunity to ensure that those regs align with the strategy, because they don't currently align. And then my second question is, there are a lot of mining companies out there that are seeking to change their current closure objectives in their EMPs, which would actually align with the strategy. They're hoping to implement post-mining economies at their mining sites. But the regional offices of the DMRE are not so keen on that, and are actually rejecting those applications and forcing us as lawyers to have to take those decisions on appeal. So my question is, how much sort of engagement are you having with the regional offices to align them with the national strategy of changing the mindset of mine closure going forward?
Can I go ahead? Okay.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, I have to admit that remember, with regards to any policy that starts to work, or even this national closure strategy is not yet a policy, but our region are on board. We've been discussing with them. The only thing is that currently it's not yet a law. We are still consulting. As soon as it becomes a law and as soon as everything has been geared up, I agree with Ms. Mudau in her presentation to say this is one step to a good to a right direction. So that, you know, once we get this strategy finalized, it's going to enable us now to make it a policy. And once it's a policy, now it's an implementable law, which is what we want at the end of the day to be clear also when it's implemented by mining companies to say these are things that you need to comply with, and our region as well. But just to give you a comfort, we are communicating with our colleagues at Department of Environmental Affairs. We are communicating with our colleagues at Department of, now I'm forgetting the new names. Colleagues, you'll bear with me. I think it's DFFE now, as well as also the Department of Water and Sanitation. So they've been part and process of development of this, and including financial provisioning. I was part of those who also were in the lead in terms of developing that. So we ascertained that, and we are hoping with all those that everything is aligned. But we are opening everything for comments. Should you feel that there are certain areas that you feel that are not aligned, please come forward. Like as I said, this is our strategy. It's not a department strategy. It's our strategy. And I think it's key for us to own it so that it assists us to alleviate ghost towns and to assist us to implement the law accordingly. Thank you very much.
Oh, Michael, you're muted. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I beg your pardon. My phone went off. We're going to have to bring the session to an end, so I'm going to ask Aisha to close, but suffice to say, if the audience would like to have a second session on this, where we just deal with questions of this nature, we're very happy to do that as part of the series. Aisha, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, I suppose I'll just highlight Broadhurst's comment and then we'll close. And it's really speaking to how these recent reports have indicated newly formed Tugela resources are significantly underestimating their environmental liabilities, particularly in terms of post-closure impacts. This seems to speak to the loopholes that Mariette was talking about. So really emphasizing how important this topic is and how we can take it forward in discussing, and perhaps taking this into a Q&A session specifically for unpacking some of these avenues. So yes, thank you so much to the panelists for joining us today, and to Professor Michael Solomon for facilitating the session. And I hope you have a lovely Wednesday afternoon further. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Aisha. Appreciate it. Bye.
Thank